In a summer day in 2003, high school student Sarah finished school like any other day, but she didn't go home right away and went to a watch repair shop. Today was her father's birthday, so she took her father's favorite watch to have it repaired as a birthday gift for him. The sound of police sirens on the street sounded frequent. Sarah was not surprised, because recently there were often cases of injury. The store owner was extremely nervous and quickly closed the store. She felt that there were more police cars today than usual. Fortunately, Sarah's father's watch had already been repaired, and she was immediately kicked out of the shop. Her father had told her to go to the neighbor's house. The dog kept looking at the paralyzed old woman. Sarah didn't think much of it. She just went out and saw fighter jets flying overhead. She felt a little scared. Could something really happen today? Waiting until after 10 o'clock, her father dragged his tired body home. There was no birthday cake, no congratulations, but his daughter gave him a watch that was repaired like new. Mr. Joe was deeply moved. Father and daughter watched TV until late. Then Joe's phone suddenly rang. It turned out that his younger brother Tommy had assaulted a man who suddenly went crazy and was locked up in the police station waiting for Joe to come bail him out. Joe felt a little uneasy in his heart. He watched his daughter sleep soundly before going out. Who would have thought that not long after, the sound of the helicopter woke Sarah up? She went downstairs to turn on the TV. All channels were broadcasting emergency news, warning people to stay indoors. At the time, Sarah was surprised. The neighbor's dog cried outside the door. Sarah was about to take it for a walk when she got home. She suddenly arrived at the door. The dog ran away in fear. Seeing the neighbor's door open, Sarah went inside. There was a long trail of blood on the ground. Seeing that the old neighbor was dying, Sarah was stunned and didn't know what to do. There was noise in the hallway. It was the paralyzed old woman licking blood, her fleshy tentacles cold. Sarah ran away in fear. At that moment, Mr. Joe returned, not expecting the old woman to chase her out. Joe did not hesitate to knock his opponent down. Sarah was scared and couldn't say anything. At this time, Joe realized the seriousness of the problem and quickly put his daughter in the car and helped his younger brother drive away. There were a few infected people on the street, and police sirens were heard everywhere. Sarah didn't know what had happened. Joe also understood a little. The radio reported that there was a type of bacteria that caused infection, causing people to go crazy. He would escape this place first and think about it later. On the road, someone asked for help. Joe told his younger brother not to stop the car, even if the other person was a child. But when leaving the city, the road was far from clear, so Tommy had to take another detour. But unexpectedly, the front was also blocked by the army. Round and round, they came to a town. They didn't expect this place to be even more chaotic. Is it possible that the end of the world is coming? On the street were people infected with madness and people running away. A plane crashed, causing a huge explosion. When Joe woke up, Sarah had an injured leg. Before she could get the axe out, she was hit by a police car. Tommy was near the wall surrounded by fire. The place was extremely chaotic. Tommy told Joe to go ahead and leave him alone. At that time, everyone met again at the riverbank. Joe, worried about his daughter's safety, picked her up and walked towards the outskirts. On the road, infected people were biting. The situation was extremely dangerous. Joe and his two companions were chased by an infected person. He could only run into a nearby restaurant. Who knew the opponent ran so fast, following closely behind? Joe put all his strength into running out the back door of the restaurant. When he was cornered, a gunshot rang out. The infected person fell down. It turned out to be a patrol soldier who happened to be passing by this place. But when the soldier saw that Sarah was injured, he became tense and used the radio to ask for orders from his superiors to open fire and shoot them. Joe and his daughter struggled desperately, but the soldier intended to finish them off. Suddenly, someone opened fire from behind, shooting the soldier down. It turned out to be Tommy. Joe looked at the wound. The bullet had just passed through him, but his daughter was not so lucky. Blood flowed continuously. Her breathing was ragged. Joe quickly carried his daughter to the hospital. Tommy stood there in pain because Sarah would not survive. In the next 20 years, people were unable to research an antidote or vaccine. The unknown virus has been raging on Earth for 20 decades. By now, everywhere is a post-apocalyptic scene. The government can only build centralized quarantine areas for survivors and will occasionally receive people from other regions. They just check that they're not infected. The quarantine area will accept them. It's just that life inside has changed a lot. First is the harsh law. For example, do not disrupt order. You can't go in and out of the quarantine area at will. If you commit any crime, you'll be arrested. This is the cruel life in the post-apocalyptic era. People who want to survive can only sell their strength in exchange for food vouchers. Joe is a laborer and is only paid a voucher for 3 meals a day. Luckily, he had his own way to get some sedatives to sell to insomniac soldiers. He also earned a little from this. The thing Joe is most worried about is Tommy, because Tommy has been out on duty for more than 3 weeks and still has no news. The liaison officer told Joe that the last time Tommy sent news was through the course station. Joe didn't ask too much and went back to his accommodation to find the location of the course station. If Tommy had an accident, he would definitely be nearby. Now the world is extremely chaotic, in which the organization called Fireflies is the most prominent. Looting is also widespread. Even in the quarantine area, there are many protest organizations. Whichever side has more weapons is stronger, but Joe doesn't mind this. Right now, what he wanted to do most was to search for Tommy. The next morning, Joe's mate, Miss Tess, told him a secret piece of news. The car battery that they bought previously was stolen by someone else. Humanity's current science and technology are increasingly outdated. Not only oil, but also batteries have become rare. Joe's heart was extremely heavy. If they don't have a car, they can't go look for Tommy. Now they have to think of a way to get the battery back. The two of them spent a lot to find the robber's lair, but when they got there through the water pipe, the surroundings were extremely quiet. It looked like no one had lived there for a long time. Tess was startled and screamed. It turned out that there were skeletons of infected people on the wall. I don't know how much time has passed. The fungus has spread. The two searched every corner and finally discovered a secret passage, but the iron door was locked. Joe discovered blood flowing from the crack in the door and had a bad feeling in his heart. Using force to push the door, he discovered scattered bodies lying about. The robber who took the battery was also among them. Joe shone the light on the battery and saw that it was damaged. Before he could click his tongue, there was a noise deep in the tunnel. There were two people helping each other forward. Suddenly, someone came out holding a knife. Joe looked closely and saw it was a little girl about 10 years old. The two people in front also turned their heads. Only when they saw their faces clearly did they feel reassured. It turns out they know each other. The other person is Malin, leader of the Fireflies resistance organization in the quarantine zone. The robbers had the battery and wanted to trade with her, but they intended to double-cross her and kill her, so she was injured. Malin knew Joe had a military background, so she asked him to take this girl to the conference building of another quarantine area. The payment would be weapons and batteries. Feeling that this deal was very good, and the destination was not far away, they could use the battery to go to a further place to find Tommy. Before leaving, Malin told Joe to try to bring the girl there. She was very important to humanity. And so little Ellie followed Joe back to his residence. He was curious about the girl's identity, but Ellie is very smart and alert, talking a lot, giving Joe a headache, and not revealing anything about herself. When night fell, the entire quarantine area began to strictly guard itself. Joe and Tess took Ellie out of the quarantine area using a half-pipe. It looked like it wasn't the first time Joe and Tess had done this. They successfully avoided the patrolling guards. When they passed a room, they were unfortunately discovered by a soldier. Joe didn't dare to resist. He could only obediently raise his hands. When the soldiers were about to check Ellie to see if she was infected with the virus, she suddenly reacted and resisted. This behavior angered the soldiers. Joe recalled the scene from 20 years ago, so he rushed forward and pushed the soldier down, punching him one shot after another until the opponent no longer reacted. At this time, Tess subdued the soldier and screamed that Ellie was infected. The girl tried her best to explain that the wound was over 3 weeks old and showed no signs of infection. Joe also ignored this, because the other soldiers would quickly find out, so they left in the middle of the chaos. Continuing with episode 2, the scary virus invades the Earth. The world welcomes the end of the world. Because in order to get the battery, Joe took on the task of taking little Ellie to another quarantine area. Unexpectedly, just after hiding out, Joe discovered that Ellie was infected. He didn't have time to think. He took the girl out of there first and thought about it later. When they found a safe place, he would ask clearly, "What are the injuries on your body?" Ellie by the pond said although she was bitten, she was not infected. At first, Malin was also afraid for Ellie for 3 weeks. She checked her health status every day. The wound healed before releasing the girl. Over the years, Joe has gone through a lot of things, thinking that Ellie would sooner or later be infected, and was about to give up the task of bringing her back to the quarantine area. As he sat munching on a piece of dried meat, Ellie took a delicious sandwich from her backpack. This is what Malin prepared for her. Tess asked why Malin took it so seriously. That Ellie is like that, because the sandwiches are common goods in the quarantine area. Ellie hesitated for a while, and finally said the purpose of this trip. It turned out that after many days of testing, Malin determined that Ellie was immune to the virus. The Western Firefly organization had experts researching antidotes, so Malin entrusted Joe to escort Ellie there, perhaps finding a way to prepare a vaccine from her body. I didn't expect Ellie to be so important to Firefly. The reward for this mission couldn't be better, so the 3 people agreed to continue to the conference building. This was the first time Ellie had seen the outside world since she was born. Although the high-rise buildings were ruined, they could not hide how glorious they once were. Joe was not surprised. This was not the first time he had gone out of the quarantine area. He said the Firefly organization was in the front building. Going straight would be quick, but there were many infected people inside. To ensure safety, they took a detour. Ellie was extremely curious. Isn't it said that there are a lot of infected people outside? Why haven't I met anyone yet? Tess suddenly reacted. Ellie had never been outside, so where was she bitten? Ellie said there was a place in the quarantine area that was blocked off, and Tess knew that place was the restricted area that the Federal Disaster Response Agency had mentioned. Then Tess turned back to Joe. It seems to imply that Ellie is not a girl who knows how to listen to others. They suddenly stopped, and in the distance there was a terrifying roar. Tess looked around nervously and quickly walked forward. The 3 people went inside a ruined building. They had to go through here to continue. Luckily, the water wasn't too deep. Ellie curiously looked up and down. A group of infected people rose to the surface of the water. Joe ran to confirm there was no danger before continuing on his way. Then they came to a blocked road. Tess went first. The crack in the rock was also large. They easily passed the barriers and finally reached the roof. But their expressions immediately became heavy. The road ahead is filled with bloodthirsty infected people. Because the virus is still active, they can detect sounds hundreds of meters away. A quiet passing is impossible. The 3 of them could only change direction, choosing to go through the church, which seems safer. Dried mushrooms cling to the walls. Infected people are likely hiding inside. They did not dare to act rashly. Joe pulled out his weapon and the church door opened. Joe took the lead and walked in. When the light passed, everyone saw it was infected with disease and fungus. Suddenly, a corpse caught their eye. Joe guessed that the other person was an infected person who had encountered an accident outside, so he ran here to take refuge. Ellie noticed something unusual. Did this man die like that? Joe's face became unsightly. He advised Ellie to stop talking and not make any noise. Even going up the stairs, they had to be very careful. Joe now determined that there must be someone infected in the church. As they walked upstairs, there were more and more dried mushrooms and human corpses, making them feel like they were in a horrifying place. Ellie was not careful and touched a dry arm. The noise made everyone scared and sweating. Luckily, they weren't discovered by the infected person. Before they could catch their breath, the nearby wall suddenly collapsed, blocking the road. The three people didn't dare to breathe. A thin shadow passed by. Joe's stiff face signaled everyone to hide behind a closet. Infected people are extremely sensitive to sound and must not make any noise. The whole building echoed with the terrifying roar of infected people. This was the first time Ellie encountered this. The girl breathed rapidly. Joe immediately opened fire, but unexpectedly an infected person rushed in. The three people got lost in the chaos and quickly found a place to hide. Joe worries about Ellie's safety. After avoiding infected people, he also found the girl. As the two of them were about to leave, Joe unfortunately stepped on a piece of debris that fell to the ground. The infected person rushed in. Joe immediately opened fire and shot the opponent in the head. But another infected person appeared. Tess hid to the side and promptly took action, using a knife to slash its head. Joe used a gun to kill the infected person. Ellie was bitten, but she pretended like nothing happened, confident that she has physical immunity. And Tess also unfortunately stumbled and was bitten. Even though it was a skin wound, she somehow became worried. Catching sight of Joe and Ellie, she hurriedly urged them to leave quickly. After passing the church, just go through this road to get there. Ellie was extremely curious why there was such a deep hole. Tess stopped walking and told her it was caused by a virus outbreak. In a certain city in the summer of 2013, a top virus expert was having breakfast. A few soldiers suddenly came to the restaurant and took her to a secret laboratory. The soldiers didn't explain much, just told her to look at the virus sample under a microscope. She immediately recognized this as the named mushroom cordyceps. When the soldiers said they took it from a human body, the expert's face turned serious. Because the cordyceps mushroom cannot exist on the human body, the soldiers didn't explain but brought her in front of a recently dead body. The preliminary observation expert quickly found the bite mark under the body's foot. After making an incision, it was filled with fungus. After that, the expert ran out of the laboratory in fear, and the soldiers gave her a glass of water. This victim was discovered at the flour mill a few days ago. Eyewitnesses said that at that time, a worker suddenly went crazy and bit several others to death in succession. The expert's hands suddenly became sweaty. The cordyceps fungus is spreading. Because this fungus has never been detected in the human body before, there is no antidote and no vaccine. The only way to stop it is to destroy the entire city. Ellie looked at the lake in front of her, forever unable to say anything. Born in a quarantine area, she could not imagine what people would suffer during the virus outbreak. The next journey is also considered a shared spring. The three of them finally reached the Firefly organization. They didn't dare to rush in, but checked the truck in front of the door. The bloodstains on the seat gave Joe a bad feeling. Then he discovered the body under the wheel. Tess's face became unsightly. He quickly pulled Ellie inside, only to see that there was only death inside. Not only were the Firefly rebels dead, Joe discovered that one of them was infected, which was probably the reason they were collectively destroyed. Tess appeared unusually stubborn. She couldn't accept that this mission would fail again. Ellie interrupted. Tess is infected. It turned out that while at church, she was bitten by an infected person, and the virus in her body began to spread. Ellie was the complete opposite. Her wound healed on its own, proving that Ellie had antibodies in her body. Tess was extremely excited and asked Joe to take Ellie to Bill and Frank. This is the only hope for vaccine research. At this time, an infected person suddenly moved. Joe immediately opened fire to deal with it, but the virus in the opponent's body was still limbering. The infected people in the distance seemed to sense something. One after another, they stood up and roared. Joe sees danger approaching. He went out to check and found many infected people running this way. Tess's eyes were extremely determined. She poured the gasoline onto the ground, then let the grenade roll away. She told Joe to take Ellie first and that she would stay behind as cover. Although Joe couldn't bear it at all, he still pulled Ellie away. Hearing the roar coming closer, Tess quickly pulled out the lighter, but the infected person had already run over, and the lighter couldn't light the fire. Because she was infected, she was not attacked by them, so she had time to light a fire. At the critical moment, she successfully lit the fire. Joe and Ellie were outside looking at the blazing fire, feeling extremely painful. They have lost a partner. This is the cruelty of the post-apocalyptic period. End of episode 2. Continuing with episode 3, continuing the previous episode, Tess sacrifices herself to stop the infected person. On the next journey, Joe was quiet without saying a word. Because Tess was his mate, Ellie doesn't want to see Joe like that. She thinks everyone has a choice. What Joe needs to do is complete what Tess hasn't done yet. Ellie's words seemed to encourage Joe. He urged her to leave quickly. They had to find Bill outside the quarantine area for help. In the middle of the road, the two passed by a farm. This is the relay station where Joe's supplies are hidden. It's just been so long, he has to find out where he hid it. Ellie has never been outside. The girl curiously glanced sideways. By chance, she discovered a basement. The girl jumped down excitedly. The shelves were empty. Only a missing tampon was left. In the corner, suddenly there was the sound of a groan. It turned out there was just an infected person being crushed by bricks and stones. Ellie nervously approached and discovered that the other person was not as scary as she thought. The girl made a beeline for the infected person's face, then stabbed hard. Ellie didn't show any signs of panic. It seems like just a matter of course for her. Joe had now finished arranging his things. He thought for a moment and then put the gun away again. Because its bullets are very rare, it is not easy to use. Then the two continued on their way. Ellie looked towards the plane. She admires people who have been able to fly. Joe immediately said they would all die. This statement piqued Ellie's curiosity. She wanted to know before she died who the first infected person was. Joe shook his head. Perhaps the virus seeped into the human food chain. On the evening of September 26, 2013, there were many infected people who then started biting people like crazy. While the two of them were talking, they came to a deep hole, filled with human bones inside. Ellie's eyes were extremely surprised and confused, but Joe was not surprised. He said as the virus spread widely, the army organized people to go to quarantine areas. But the place was packed with people, so these people were sentenced to be brought down here. In the eyes of the ruler, it is better to kill 100 innocent than let one infected escape. But everything has exceptions. Back in the past, a man named Bill did not go to the government quarantine area like other residents. He is an extremist. Before the virus spread, Bill kept a large amount of food at home. Bill believes that when the end of the world comes, if you want to survive, you must rely on yourself. When the whole town only had Bill, he conducted strict security work. How to survive in the end of the world. Bill's approach can be called a survival guide. Gasoline and fuel are indispensable, so he kept a lot of it. When picking up fruits and vegetables, you also have to prepare them in advance. The most important thing is to use iron and wood to block the roads in town. Of course, traps have to be set out outside. Just like that, Bill lived leisurely for 4 years, until one day someone fell into a trap. Bill took the gun out to check. The opponent's name is Frank, also about the same age as him. Frank was escaping the quarantine area with everyone. When he came here, he was alone. Bill couldn't stand his whining. After confirming that the other person was not infected, Bill let him have a meal together. Frank exclaimed that this was the most delicious meal in the past 4 years. Bill sat there without saying anything, just wanting to get rid of Frank. Unexpectedly, as soon as the other person saw the piano in the living room, he immediately became excited and had to play a tune before leaving. When the deafening sound of the piano resounded, Bill swore his ears were being tortured and immediately stopped Frank. He wanted to let the other person know what the sound of the piano really was like. The loud sound of the guitar rang out, combined with Bill's deep voice. Frank sat to the side and listened. He felt the loneliness in Bill's voice. There is strong sympathy in his heart. Bill also opened the door of his heart to accept the man who appeared in his life. The two of them lived together like that for 3 years. The conflicts between them are also increasing. Bill is an introvert, and Frank cannot stand loneliness. He would rather go cleaning shops on the street than stay at home. Meanwhile, they also got to know Tess and Joe in the quarantine area via radio. At first, Bill was not friendly at all, but Joe only needed to say one sentence to become friends with Bill. The barrier began to erode. He was able to bring some new materials to trade and also helped Bill and Frank eat things they hadn't eaten in a long time. Since then, the relationship between the 4 people has become closer and closer. That day, Joe warned Bill that barriers could stop infected people, but they could not stop humans with evil intentions. Unexpectedly, this statement came true. That night, a group of armed soldiers arrived at the town, but luckily they started in time. Frank woke up. He looked around the house but couldn't see any sign of Bill. It turned out that Bill had run out and shot back. Frank called him to come inside quickly. Unexpectedly, Bill was immediately shot. Frank quickly helped him into the house. Bill bled non-stop. He felt he was about to die and advised Frank to quickly find Joe. Frank didn't respond, just held Bill's cold hand. As his vision faded, unexpectedly, Bill was still alive. The two of them now have dew on their hair. Frank died seriously ill. Even taking care of yourself is difficult. Bill is willing to do these things for him. Although their lives are not as complete as before, now they cannot live without each other. It's just that Frank doesn't want to be a burden to Bill. He decided to end his life tonight. Even though Bill couldn't bear it, he respected his partner's decision. Frank was moved to tears. He said he spent a happy life with Bill. Today is his last day on Earth. Bill couldn't bear to refuse his partner's request, so he pushed Frank for a walk in the town. They looked at the flowers together, looking at the place where the two of them first met. Then they chose the 2 best suits, exchanging rings with each other in the sunset. As night falls, Bill prepares Frank's last meal. It was like the first time 2 people had a meal together. Frank smiled happily. He said this was the happiest day of his life. Bill didn't dare look Frank in the eyes and just quietly mixed the medicine into the wine glass. Frank watched as Bill finally gulped down his glass of wine. Bill said he put drugs in both glasses so he could die with his partner. He was very satisfied. After speaking, the two looked at each other and couldn't help but burst out laughing. The light flickered. Bill pushed Frank toward the bed. Joe and Ellie have now arrived in town. They pressed the code to open the door next door. Joe looked at the withered flowers in front of Bill's house. He immediately had a bad feeling, especially seeing the table of food that had been rotten for a long time. He quickly ran into the bedroom, but the door was locked tightly. Ellie saw the letter on the table. This was the will Bill left behind. He told Joe not to open the bedroom. The smell inside will be very unpleasant. Bill feels Joe is the only person who understands him. When everyone dies, inside Bill doesn't have any emotions. Until he met Frank, someone worth protecting for the rest of his life. When Bill dies, he will leave his car and weapons to Joe, so he can continue to protect the people he loves. But Bill didn't know that Tess was no longer there. There was an undescribable feeling of pain in Joe's heart. Looking at the key in his hand, he opened the warehouse door. Inside is a pickup truck in good condition. Just need the battery. Joe confirmed again that Ellie was not sick, then said his next plan. He had to go to the Wyoming state to find his younger brother, who was once a member of the Fireflies, so he could take Ellie to a nearby laboratory. Ellie, of course, agreed. Joe told the girl to listen to him and not reveal her identity or the wound on her hand. Then the two went down to the basement. This place stores a lot of weapons. Ellie exclaimed that Bill is a skilled preparer. This place still stores many necessary products. Joe told Ellie to bring as much as she could. He even threw a gun into her backpack. When everything was finished, the two sat in the car. Uncle Joe carefully fastened Ellie's seatbelt, beginning a new adventurous journey. End of episode 3. Continuing with episode 4, the virus invades the Earth. The world enters a post-apocalyptic period. Joe and little Ellie headed to the Wyoming state to find his younger brother. Because the road is far away, every time he passes a gas station, Joe stops to get gas. There are many scrap cars on both sides of the road, but now the gasoline inside is too old and has almost evaporated. The one-day, one-night journey made Ellie extremely bored. The girl found a tape in the car with classical music playing. Then Ellie found the magazine Playboy. Joe was extremely impatient and told her to quickly throw it away and not look at it. Ellie argued, asking why were these pages stuck together. It seems that Ellie is more mature than her age. Joe chooses the highway to take. The possibility of meeting infected people will be very few, and there will be very few obstacles. There were only dilapidated buildings on both sides of the road that seemed to tell of the sadness and chaos of the past. When night fell, Joe stopped going on the asphalt road and turned into a dense forest. Although this place is far from the city and there will be no infected people, they do not dare to light a fire to cook and only eat expired canned food. Over the years, Joe has experienced countless things and clearly understood that people are scarier than infected people. The two of them spread out the mattress to sleep. Ellie suddenly asked why the stupid person got the reward. Joe thought for a few seconds and then answered, because it stood out in the field. This bland joke helped Joe feel lighter, but that didn't make him let down his guard. After taking a nap overnight, Joe makes a cup of coffee, as usual. After that, the two continued on their way. Ellie looked at the map and was one day and one night away from her destination. The girl felt excited when she and Joe went looking for her younger brother. He also did not hide anything. He said Tommy just wanted to save the world all day, and after graduating from high school, he immediately joined the army. After the virus broke out, in order to protect his younger brother, he also joined Tommy's team in Boston. There, he met Tess, and Tommy knows Madeline. From there, he turned to join the Firefly organization. He kept feeling that Tommy was just having an illusion of strength. Ellie suddenly recovered. If there was no hope, why would anyone still be alive? Joe thought for a moment and then said his hope was to protect his loved ones, so he went looking for Tommy. Ellie asked him if she was his relative. Joe said frankly, "You're just a commodity," but he promised Tess he would protect Ellie. While the two talked, there were more and more cars on both sides of the road, so Joe had to stop. Because the front was blocked by a truck, Joe carefully checked his surroundings. Relying on him alone cannot handle the obstacle. The only way is to take a detour, but then they would have to go off the highway to the residential area, which would be much more dangerous. Human bodies were burned and piled up. Ellie suddenly saw the abandoned quarantine area. An injured person ran to ask for help. Joe didn't have time to think, told Ellie to quickly fasten her seatbelt, then stepped on the gas pedal. Unexpectedly, the surroundings were ambushed. The tire was punctured, then they crashed into a store. Joe knew he had encountered robbers. This is a daily occurrence. Bullets kept flying. Joe shouted loudly, standing up and shooting back. Ellie took the opportunity to escape. When the gunfire ended and the enemy was destroyed, Joe was just about to reload when someone rushed in from behind. He was attacked by the enemy. Ellie hid behind the wall, realizing Joe was in trouble. So she pulled out a gun and shot the attacker in the leg. He begged not to kill him, then threw away the dagger on his body. Said he wouldn't resist. Joe didn't care, raised his hand to reclaim the gun, and told the girl to hide behind the wall. Then a gunshot rang out. The begging stopped. Ellie knows Joe killed his opponent, but she just acted like nothing happened. She understands the rules of survival. You must not have any compassion. Joe was surprised to see Ellie enlighten so quickly, and didn't explain anything further. The immediate task is to leave here. As expected, the recent shooting incident attracted the attention of the local armed organization. A group of people with guns surrounded the area. Some people guessed that someone from another place did it. The leader, Kathleen, appeared extremely tense, likely the one who confronted Henry and called for help. Then Kathleen summoned forces to quickly arrest this rioter. You can't blame Kathleen for this much, because not long ago, she led the lower class to overthrow the quarantine zone established by the government. There are still a few people in charge running away. Among them, Henry has messed things up. They were forced to quickly arrest him. The entire resistance army began to search house by house. Joe hid in a house, a little worried. Joe apologized to Ellie just now because it was his negligence that let her see the bloody scene. Who would have thought that the girl was extremely indifferent, saying, "This is not the first time." Joe also felt more secure, proactively returned the gun to Ellie and taught her how to hold the gun firmly. Schools in quarantine areas don't teach these things. Joe has a different view of Ellie, no longer considering her a burden or commodity. The rebels searched for half a day and finally discovered something. They saw many drawings of the children on the elevator floor. There is some canned food on the ground. Carlin argued that Henry probably left because he ran out of food, so he took the child somewhere else. Suddenly, there was a noise in the room downstairs. The door pushed into the middle of the floor, and a subsidence hole appeared. Carlin cursed and quickly ran out of the room. She knew there must be something scary in the basement. She had her subordinates block the building. Now they had to find the rioters first and deal with this later. Joe and Ellie have now arrived at an abandoned building. This place is 42 stories high. Joe decided to go up. The higher you go, the safer it is. When it's light, it's convenient to observe the route. Ellie didn't understand why the other person asked for help at first. Joe knew this was the enemy's trap. He explained that in the past he did not believe that much, but he's done things like that before. Because there is nothing that humans cannot do to survive. If you want to survive, you must not trust anyone. The two climbed to the 40th floor. Joe chose a room to rest. He also carefully placed a piece of glass in front of the door to prevent anyone from sneaking in. Joe feels a little guilty. He felt Ellie was too young to witness such a cruel scene. The girl asked him again if he knew that diarrhea would be hereditary. Joe was bewildered. Ellie immediately said the answer is called transmission. Joe turned around and couldn't help but laugh. The cold, dark room gradually became warmer. I don't know how much time passed. Ellie woke Joe up. Opposite him were two black gun barrels. End of episode 4. Continuing with episode 5, the rebels of Kansas City finally overthrow the brutal rule of the government here. All the people gathered to celebrate. Next is to wipe out the remaining forces. Of course, we can't ignore those who stand at desks. These people are also the lower class in the city. But in order to exchange for more necessities, they secretly revealed confidential information to the ruler. Kathleen absolutely hates this. After giving the order to destroy them all, she emphasized the need to capture the Henry brothers. On the road at this time, resistance troops were deployed everywhere. The Henry brothers are familiar with the terrain here. They always stay out of sight of the rebels. The two walked around for a while and entered a residential house. Unexpectedly, a shadow of a person stepped out from inside. Henry clearly saw the other person and breathed a sigh of relief. It turned out that the two were friends who had known each other for many years. The two agreed to take refuge on the elevator floor, but they didn't bring much food. Henry calculated that they could last at most 11 days. The protesters on the streets were constantly searching for them. Henry looked at his younger brother Sam sitting alone crying. Trying hard to smile, he handed a bag of crayons to his younger brother. Sam drew all over the wall. The boy forgot the difficult situation. In the blink of an eye, 10 days have passed. The food has run out, and Henry's friend who went out to look for food has not returned for many days. Henry knew he was probably captured by the rebels. To avoid revealing the brother's hiding place, he was likely killed by rebels. Rebels outside are still searching everywhere. Henry knew it was time to leave, but his brother Sam was extremely worried. Henry looked at the drawing of a superhero on the wall and told his younger brother to close his eyes in fear, then painted his face so that when he looked in the mirror, he would look like a superhero. Sam smiled happily. The two brothers were about to go out when there were gunshots outside. Henry looked outside to see Joe shooting with the rebels, so he immediately followed Joe to this building. Late at night, he snuck into the room and captured Joe and Ellie, but Henry did not intend to kill and rob them, but wanted to cooperate with them. The four of them were all being sought by the rebels. In some ways, the enemy of your enemy is your friend. Henry is familiar with the terrain here. He knew there was a hidden path that led outside the city. Joe became wary. Henry could run away on his own. Why would he seek his cooperation? Henry said that he had never killed anyone in his life and needed someone who knew how to shoot a gun like Joe. After Ellie and Sam had fun together, Joe finally agrees to cooperate. Henry quickly took a sheet with a map. Guards are distributed around the city to monitor. The only way out of here is by water pipe, which Joe finds a bit strange. If you don't encounter a guard, who will you have to deal with? Henry's expression became serious. This city has no infected people because they were chased into the tunnel. Joe's expression is extremely unsightly. If we go down the pipe, it's like looking for a place to die. Henry affirmed that there were very few infected people under the pipeline. At most, he had only met 1 or 2. Joe knew it was dangerous, but it was the only way to run. The four of them arrived at the train station. They had to escape this city full of rebels through the tube. The road ahead is extremely dark. They walked slowly, wary of the possibility of an infected person appearing at any time. Luckily, not long after, they discovered a basement with drawings on all four walls. There are a lot of basic items on the ground. Joe wasn't too surprised. Ellie and Sam didn't bring this. They enjoyed finding toys. The race that grew up in the post-apocalyptic era, not knowing the devastation when the new virus struck. Henry was also more relieved. He hadn't seen his brother so happy in a long time. Joe also understood why Henry colluded with the enemy. If you want to feed your younger brother, you must have more supplies. Henry sighed. Things were not simple, otherwise the rebels would not have mobilized their forces to search for them so harshly. It turned out that his younger brother had leukemia. The only cure was to find a ruler to exchange medicine. Therefore, Henry had to betray and kill the leader of the resistance army he most admired. And the current leader, Kathleen, is the biological sister of the leader who was murdered by him. No wonder she hates the Henry brothers so much. After listening, Joe was speechless. There is no blame in his heart. To survive at the end of the world, how many people can pat themselves on the back and say they are decent people? But luckily, the four of them went through the pipe smoothly. Once outside the city, Ellie innocently invited the two Henry brothers to come to the state with her. But Joe did not agree. Ellie soon knew Joe would. The sound of gunfire broke the quiet space. They quickly hid behind the car. There was a guard in the building opposite. Joe knew that this was not the way to go. Leading Ellie to stay in one place, he would find a way to deal with the opponent. He continuously changed his hiding place. Luckily, the enemy did not shoot accurately. Joe got closer and closer to the enemy's position. After opening the door, he gingerly went upstairs. He didn't expect that the shooter was just an old man. Joe said, "Just put down your weapons and you will live." Who would have thought that right after that, Joe, holding the sniper gun, was about to fall? Who would have thought that the radio would transmit Kathleen's voice, that help was about to arrive? Joe immediately shouted loudly to run away. Unfortunately, they were still one step late. A resistance army had arrived. The truck took the lead and the army followed closely behind. Luckily, at the right moment, Joe was upstairs and shot the driver. The truck lost control and crashed into the house. A loud explosion rang out, startling the protesters. When the smoke cleared, Kathleen sent people to search. Joe hid. Now there was no use in counterattacking. Henry hid behind the car, knowing that sooner or later he would be caught. For Sam and Ellie's safety, he stands up and pleads with Kathleen to spare the two children. Who would have thought that the other party would initially refuse? Even children must die. When she aimed and shot at Henry, the truck exploded. Unexpectedly, there is a deep hole under the house. Inside, there was a constant, terrifying roar. Immediately afterwards, countless infected people rushed forward towards the resistance army. No matter how strong their firepower is, they cannot withstand the attack of infected people. Henry immediately led the two children to safety, but was quickly infected. Joe quickly opened fire to cover them. Ellie crawled under the surface and into the path of a car. But at this moment, a giant infected person crawled out of the hole. It was obviously much stronger. A soldier urged Kathleen to go first, then shot continuously towards the infected person. But soon after, the opponent died miserably. Suddenly, a small infected person climbed into the car where Ellie was hiding. The little girl ran away in fear. Just in time to see the Henry brothers crawling under the car, she ran towards it dangerously. Joe rushed to open fire to cover Ellie. She held a sharp knife and killed two infected people. The three people successfully ran away from there. Suddenly, Kathleen showed up with a gun. Ellie was scared. The small infected person screamed and rushed to attack Kathleen. Joe ran down to get them out of here, while the infected people ran towards the residential area. After finding a safe place, Joe still could not calm down. Ellie and Sam were concentrating on reading books, as if nothing was happening. Henry told them to go to bed, but after the door closed, Ellie woke Sam up to continue reading the book. It's just that Sam's expression was a bit unusual. He wrote a line on paper. What was he most afraid of? Ellie thought for a while and then wrote that her biggest fear was being alone. And Sam was most afraid that after being infected, would he still be himself? Then the boy opened his clothes to reveal a deep bite. Ellie's face panicked, but she immediately calmed down. Ellie was bitten by an infected person. The girl thought her blood was the antidote. Ellie held a knife and cut her palm, smearing her blood on Sam's wound. But the boy was still worried and asked Ellie to help him stay awake. Ellie happily accepted, but she still accidentally fell asleep until morning. She saw Sam sitting next to the bed. She was about to go talk to him. Unexpectedly, he suddenly rushed in. Henry outside was also startled. He quickly picked up the gun and instinctively opened fire, killing Sam, who had turned into a zombie. When his brother's blood spread across the floor, only then did Henry realize that he had killed his younger brother. So he pointed the gun at his head again. Outside, the sky is dark and scary. Joe buries Henry's brother in a green meadow. Ellie put Sam's diary in front of the pile of dirt. On the diary, she wrote, "I'm sorry." Because she wasn't with Sam, she couldn't help him maintain his sanity. Joe witnessed the entire process and did not speak up because in the zombie apocalypse, everyone must have a lot of regrets and feelings of guilt. End of episode 5. We continue with the content of episode 6. Winter, Joe took Ellie to Wyoming. But this place is vast and sparsely populated. Not to mention, looking for his younger brother, he couldn't even find anyone. The two of them walked forever and finally found a wooden house. The landlords are a very optimistic elderly couple. Facing two strangers who suddenly burst into their house, they appeared very calm. Especially after meeting the lovely and lively girl Ellie, they were no longer wary of them. The old man knew the terrain here very well. He repeatedly warned Joe not to cross the deadly river in the forest, because the other side was quite densely populated and many people were infected. This time, Joe came here to find someone. Surely he had to go to the other side to see what happens. After thanking his grandparents, he took Ellie and continued on his way. The two of them walked through white snowfields, over yellow grass hills, and finally saw a green river. They prepared to spend the night on the riverbank. This place is large and has few people, so there are almost no infected people. Joe courageously lights a fire under the beautiful night sky. Ellie is extremely enjoying her current life. She lived in a quarantine area, so before she could only learn about the outside world through books at the library. Now they are getting closer and closer to their destination. Ellie imagines life after the antidote is successfully created. Joe's thinking is much simpler than that. He just wanted to go with his younger brother to a place without people, in a small house that raised at least cattle and goats. As the sky gradually darkened, Joe told Ellie to quickly go to sleep. He would sit there to keep watch. As a result, early the next morning, Joe suddenly woke up and saw Ellie holding a gun standing next to him. Joe was stubborn with his last bit of resolve, telling Ellie she should have called him up to keep watch. The girl did not argue and nodded obediently. The two of them continued to walk forward very quickly and saw a large bridge spanning the river. Joe probed and fired a few shots, waited and waited, but nothing happened. It seems like the other side is still quite safe. The two people smoothly crossed the river. Ellie couldn't help but complain that this place wasn't as dangerous as the old man in the wooden house said. They continued to follow the flow of the river. Seeing in the distance a large dam in the middle of the stream, Joe told Ellie that before the apocalypse came, this place used to be a place to produce electricity. Right at this moment, there were a few strangers riding horses down the slope. Before Joe could react, he was surrounded by this group of people. There was not the slightest bit of friendliness on the faces of these people. They released hunting dogs to probe whether Joe was infected or not. On the outside, Joe remained calm as if nothing happened, but inside, he felt extremely tense. Ellie is immune to disease, but perhaps she still has germs in her body. The houndmaster approached Ellie. His mind suddenly went blank, but he couldn't do anything. Luckily, the hunting dog didn't discover anything strange. Joe quickly explained that he came here to find someone, then introduced himself. At this time, a woman riding a horse slowly approached. She seemed to be a little shaken. The scene changed. Joe and the group of people rode together on the snowfields, quickly arriving at an inhabited town. After passing through the extremely thick protective wall, the scene inside suddenly changed. From the outside, this place is truly paradise. On everyone's face was a happy smile. Joe walked and looked everywhere. He saw his younger brother Tommy on a roof fixing it. They have been apart for more than half a year and finally meet again in this place. Joe couldn't help but cry. The man standing in front of him was his only relative. Everyone quickly arrived at a large restaurant. Joe and Ellie dug in to eat and drink since they hadn't had a proper meal in a long time. Tommy was also extremely excited. He solemnly introduced to his brother his wife. Her name was Maria. Because Tommy often told her about Joe, so when outside the city, Maria recognized him. This woman is one of the founders of this place. It took 7 years for it to become as prosperous as it is now. Because they destroyed the radio equipment, no major force has targeted them over the years. But for the past 2 years, electricity has been installed here. The power source comes from the dam Joe saw earlier. Now livestock production has also gone into orbit. In other words, this place is completely self-sufficient. All resources will be divided equally among everyone, which can be considered a complete society. After researching this place, Joe decided to tell his younger brother in private that he did not come here to grow old and enjoy happiness. Unexpectedly, Tommy's eyes began to avoid him. He knew that this time Joe came to take him away. But he was used to his current life and did not want to live a dangerous life with his brother. Joe still refused to give up and continued to advise him. Who would have thought Tommy suddenly said he was about to become a father? He was looking forward to his future life. Joe's eyes suddenly became much more gloomy. He said he would leave
this place early tomorrow. Right now, he felt a lot older. Even his heart felt like it had stopped beating. He saw a familiar figure standing in the crowd. Looking very quickly, Joe realized that it was his daughter, who had passed away a long time ago. Now, even his biological younger brother may also abandon him. And right now, Ellie was in Tommy's house, comfortably showering with warm water. There were still many old objects in the room. There were also some clean clothes, neatly folded. These things were prepared for Ellie by Maria. The girl curiously picked up the transparent funnel, and after reading the instructions, she knew what this thing was for. On the sink in another room, there was a blackboard with the names of 2 deceased children written on it. After asking Maria, she learned that one of them was a girl named Sarah, Joe's daughter. After bathing, she dressed neatly. Ellie was taken to a movie theater by Maria. This was an extremely luxurious thing in the end of the world, but the girl was not in the mood to watch a movie. Throughout the entire film, she kept turning her head, looking left and right. And right now, Joe was in his room, silently hurting. His younger brother Tommy brought him a new pair of shoes. He felt he had wronged his brother. Joe did not respond. Instead, he mentioned Ellie's identity. The antibodies in her body could save the world. So he was forced to take her to the Fireflies barracks. This was also Tess's will. Joe originally thought he could easily complete the task, but on the way, after going through many things, he realized he was really old and no longer as strong as before. Sometimes he even had to ask Ellie to take care of the enemy. If this continued, one day he would get Ellie killed. The best way now was for the younger Tommy to continue escorting Ellie. The younger brother listened for a long time and then said that he would take the girl away. Tommy went to Ellie's room and saw her face filled with sadness. Earlier, she had watched halfway through the movie and then went out to look for Joe. She had accidentally heard the two brothers' conversation. From a young age, Ellie was an orphan. She had soon considered Joe her only relative. Now the other person was abandoning her, claiming it was for her safety. Her heart was filled with anger. She thought that taking risks with him was better than being safe with others. Joe looked at her, then turned and left. When he returned to his room, he was silent for a long time. Suddenly, an image of the girl appeared in his mind. Early the next morning, Tommy and Ellie finished packing their things. When they arrived at the horse barn, they saw Joe preparing everything. After a night of thinking, he decided he should still be the one to take Ellie. It seemed that Ellie had already anticipated this. She quickly jumped on the horse's back. Tommy gave his hunting gun to his brother and told him to return here to live after completing his mission. Very quickly, Joe took Ellie out of town. After this, he started teaching her some survival skills. In the end of the world, relying on anyone is not as good as relying on yourself. Ellie learns very quickly, especially in some aspects that don't need to be taught. The two riders spent many days on the road, rushing through the jungle and across the vast steppe. Finally, they reached the outskirts. The Firefly barracks they wanted to find were in the university in the city. After successfully reaching her destination, Ellie began to imagine college life here. Joe patiently told her little by little. A group of monkeys suddenly appeared in their sight. Ellie guessed that maybe they ran from the laboratory. It seemed that Firefly's building was not far away. But when the two arrived and discovered there was no one guarding the door, Joe began to have a bad feeling. Inside the room, the furniture was scattered everywhere, but they couldn't see a trace of anyone. The shipping receipt on the table showed that the Firefly organization had moved somewhere else. Suddenly, there was a noise upstairs. Joe held the gun and slowly approached. After telling Ellie to be careful, he pushed the door open. Joe silently relaxed his mood. He saw a large map on the board. All the arrows converged to one point. It looked like Firefly had moved out of Salt Lake City. Suddenly, there was noise outside the door. Looking down, it turned out that several robbers had appeared. Joe quickly took Ellie downstairs to secretly leave this place. Unexpectedly, when they were about to get on their horses, a robber suddenly appeared. Joe turned around to get out of the way, then grabbed his neck and used his strength to successfully tackle the enemy. But he was also stabbed once in the stomach. As soon as Joe pulled out his knife, a few more robbers appeared. The two quickly got on their horses and ran away. Ellie opened fire continuously, shooting at the robbers, finally cutting them off. But because Joe lost too much blood, he gradually lost consciousness and fell from the horse's back. Ellie quickly ran to see what was happening, but he didn't react at all. The girl's face was filled with despair. Before, it was Joe who silently worried about everything. She didn't even have to worry about where she had to go. Now, the person who had been her support had fallen. She didn't know where to go or what to do. We continue with the content of episode 7. In the previous episode, the male lead Joe was seriously injured during a fight. On the way to escape, he lost too much blood and fainted.
Little Ellie tried her best to drag him into a nearby wooden house, but the traces left on the path were too clear. If there were people chasing them, they would soon find their way here. Joe tried to endure the pain and scolded Ellie, telling her to leave quickly. Seeing that she refused to listen, he pushed her away. Now was not the time to be stubborn. Ellie also understood this. She stood and watched Joe for a long time, then turned and walked out the door. But by the time she reached the doorknob, old things from the past suddenly came rushing back. Half a year ago, Ellie was still a trainee in the quarantine zone. Training with her were many orphans similar in age to her. Suddenly, a tall girl stole Ellie's food ration. Ellie, who was inherently hot-tempered, immediately swung her fist at the opponent. As a result, Ellie's left eye had a huge bruise, and the tall girl's face was bruised. The officer in charge of training was very helpless. This month, Ellie had been locked up in her room 3 times. He didn't want to continue punishing her the way he had before. For trainees like Ellie, from now on, there were only 2 paths to take. Poor performance would result in being transferred to the soldier with the lowest rank. Every day they had to do dull patrol work. Maybe one day they'd be shot to death by someone from Firefly. Only those who followed the rules became military officers. They lived the comfortable life that others desired. They could even arbitrarily order people like that tall girl. Ellie, without hesitation, chose the latter. This time, the teacher did not punish her anymore. He even returned the radio she had stolen earlier. After going through this, Ellie decided to be a rule-following child.
Every time it was time to go to bed, the lights would be turned off. Who would have thought that in the middle of the night, a shadow would secretly climb through the window? Ellie quickly dodged alertly and pushed the opponent to the ground. Looking closely, it turned out to be her close friend Riley, who Ellie had been missing for the past month. Ellie's heart was filled with anger as to why she had suddenly disappeared for a month. Riley didn't answer. After being silent for a long time, she spoke up and said she had joined the Firefly organization. Ellie immediately got angry. From a young age, she was taught by teachers that the Firefly organization was a violent organization. Riley didn't explain, but rather mysteriously said she would make Ellie experience the most beautiful night of her life. The quarantine area was always in a strictly prohibited state. The two little girls avoided the guards while walking towards the darkness ahead. After arriving at an abandoned residential house, the two people expertly climbed through the door into the house. Ellie was extremely curious where she wanted to take her. Riley kept stuttering and refused to speak, wanting to keep it a surprise. In the hallway, there was a door. In front of it, there was a dead man lying on the ground. Ellie was also very brave, so she went to check it out. She guessed that perhaps this person had taken drugs while drinking alcohol, which is why he died here. There was no fear in her heart. She even took the bottle of wine the dead man was holding. Suddenly, a loud noise rang out. The floor where the deceased was sitting was rotten and broke, so he fell straight down the stairs. After being scared, the two immediately drank some wine to calm down. Ellie wanted to know about Riley's gun. She still hated the Fireflies organization. In the quarantine area, there were several uprisings that were also initiated by them. Riley was silent for a long time. Then she explained that on the evening of a month ago, when she had free time to go out for a walk, she accidentally met the leader of the Fireflies organization, Malin. She said some thoughts that moved her, but Riley would let Ellie feel them for herself. While the two people were talking, they passed a building, eventually arriving in front of a large structure. Ellie was very surprised. This was the commercial center that the Federal Disaster Response Agency, FEDRA, had classified as a restricted area. Riley smiled and nodded, then took Ellie into the mall from an opening. The girl looked around curiously. This wasn't a normal room, and it even had electricity installed. Riley said a surprise was coming, and then told Ellie to go alone to the room at the end of the road. Ellie felt a little excited and quickly went through the last room to the hallway. The generator sounded, and then the scene before Ellie's eyes suddenly brightened. A colorful shopping center suddenly appeared. Ellie felt extremely surprised in her heart. She had never seen such a beautiful sight in her entire life. Her friend next to her was extremely pleased. The most special thing was still behind, and soon the two reached the elevator. This was the first time Ellie had seen one, and she was fascinated. Seeing that, Riley didn't know what to say, so she just pulled Ellie out and stopped wasting time here. All around there were shops that hadn't been closed down. Even though the flower shops inside had been stripped, Ellie could still imagine how prosperous this place was before the apocalypse struck. Riley, walking in front, suddenly stopped to add to the mystery and told Ellie to close her eyes. The girl was having fun, so she let her friend lead her. With their eyes closed, they walked to the merry-go-round. For this thing that could only be seen in books, Ellie was both happy and curious, not even forgetting to take out wine.
Celebrate. Until the strange feeling completely disappeared, Riley suddenly solemnly opened her mouth to speak. People in the quarantine zone were under the rule of the Federal Disaster Response Agency. Every day they had to do hard work in return for meager necessities. The purpose of Firefly's existence was to overthrow the rule of the Federal Disaster Response Agency, so that people could return to life before the apocalypse. Ellie still couldn't agree with this idea. She said that when the older girl became a manager, then she could change these things too. Riley had just turned 17 at the beginning of last month, but the teacher assigned her the job of guarding the drainage pipes. She didn't want to spend the rest of her life watching people clean up everything, so she decided to leave here and join Firefly. Ellie suddenly felt a bit depressed. It seemed she was still too naive. Thoughts that had been planted for a long time, how could she easily change them? After that, the two of them walked around the shopping center together and experienced taking pictures, even though the printed pictures were not very good. When they arrived in front of an arcade, Ellie was so surprised that her eyes widened. Game consoles with all shapes and designs made her eyes dizzy. While the two of them were having fun to the point of forgetting heaven and earth, in a dark corner of the hallway, an infected person who was sleeping suddenly woke up. Ellie happily said it was time to go to the next stop. Unexpectedly, Riley suddenly became silent. She had to go back to the military training area. Because she wanted to become a manager, she didn't want to miss her morning class. Riley didn't stop her, but she also prepared a gift. Suddenly, Ellie's eyes lit up. She was a little excited and followed her friend to a bread shop. They came out, and this was where Riley lived. Ellie saw her take out an old book from her backpack. This was the second verse of the book, no pun intended, that Ellie liked the most. At that moment, Ellie saw a row of grenades on the woman. These were weapons that could take a person's life. Riley explains she would never use these on normal people. Ellie reacted very quickly. Was this something a newbie like her could decide? Then she angrily left. Riley chased after her. She said a little impatiently that she was about to be sent to the quarantine area in Atlanta. This night was the last night she could stay here. Ellie's expression became even more gloomy. She couldn't understand why her best friend was abandoning her. She didn't wait for Riley to explain and left angrily. But as soon as she reached the hallway, Ellie suddenly regained a bit of reason. She shouldn't have said goodbye to her best friend like that. So she turned around and headed back to the mall. Suddenly, there was a scream in the distance. Ellie worried that her friend was in danger. She tried to run faster until she reached the place, where she discovered it was a teddy bear that could make sounds. This was the last surprise gift Riley had prepared for her. The anger in Ellie's heart suddenly decreased by half. At this point, Riley revealed the reason why she was leaving. At a young age, Riley had lost both her parents. Even though the time she had joined Firefly was short, she could feel the atmosphere of a family. The organization gave her the feeling that she was born to belong here. That made it impossible for her to refuse any decision of the organization. Ellie didn't hold her back anymore. Now the only thing she could give Riley was a blessing. Riley's mood was much happier. She decided to continue having fun. Cheerful music sounded. Two people wearing two strange masks started dancing. The music ended. Ellie looked at Riley thoughtfully and once again asked her friend to stay. Unexpectedly, just as Riley nodded in agreement, a chaotic sound came from outside. The two of them simultaneously sensed danger approaching. An infected person rushed out screaming. Riley opened fire but did not hit the enemy's weak point. She could only drag Ellie along and run away frantically. Unexpectedly, the infected person quickly rushed at the two people. Ellie immediately pulled out a knife and stabbed the infected person hard. Just as it was about to bite Ellie, Riley hit it with a stick, but it bit her instead. Ellie took the opportunity to hold the dagger and stab it hard in the head. The first time killing an infected person, Ellie looked very excited. Not only that, Riley's hand also had a very deep scratch. The two were immediately in pain and despair. Today, they only had two paths to choose from. One was to commit suicide before they were fully infected, so it would be quick and painless. But Riley did not hesitate to choose the second option. When you die, everything will disappear. Even though their lives only had a few short minutes left, she had to continue persevering. The flashback ended. Ellie suddenly woke up to the present. She couldn't continue to leave her teammates behind. Perhaps she had no way to save Riley before, but with Joe this time, she would risk everything to fight for her teammate's life. Very quickly, Ellie found the needle and thread in the cupboard. Ignoring Joe's checking mock and slightly hazy eyes, Ellie diligently stitched his wound. End of episode 7. Continuing with episode 8, poor Joe, even though his wound was stitched up, was showing symptoms of infection very clearly. Ellie was still by his side taking care of him, never leaving him for one step. But this was not a long-term plan, especially when there was not much food left. She crushed the last bit of dried meat and put it
In Joe's mouth, then took the gun and left the house. After looking around and finding no sign of the people chasing them, Ellie silently sighed in relief. She slowly walked step by step deep into the forest. She had to quickly hunt her prey. But the winter was cold, there were few animals, and Ellie's survival skills were limited. It wasn't until noon that she discovered a deer. After choosing the aiming position, she remembered Joe's teachings and used her strength to pull the trigger. Although the deer was hit, it did not die on the spot and was found by two strange men. While the two of them were thinking about whether or not to take the deer away, Ellie shouted and then appeared nearby with a gun. Everything happened so suddenly, the two men could only put down their weapons and surrender. One of them called himself the preacher David, and he looked extremely calm. He knew that Ellie could not bring this deer home alone, so he offered to use items in exchange for the deer. Ellie felt a little moved and asked the two of them if they had medicine to treat the infection. David nodded. There was penicillin in the town where he lived. Ellie immediately agreed to use half a deer in exchange for medicine. David saw that the other person was very sincere and immediately told his companion James to go back and get the medicine. Then he proactively dragged the deer into the abandoned wooden house. The two of them sat around the fire and started talking. David thought it was dangerous for Ellie to be out alone, so he wanted to invite her to his town. That was where the survivors gathered to live. Previously, they lived a self-sufficient life. It's just that this year's winter was longer than usual. The seeds could not germinate. Even the animals in nature were much fewer. Just a few days ago in town, someone died, and the daughter of the deceased wanted her father to be buried. But David refused this request. The ground was so hard that they had to wait until spring to dig. To lead everyone through this harsh winter, he and the other hunters hunted for game. Unexpectedly, they met little Ellie. David said he used to be a teacher and later became a preacher. After hearing this, Ellie also relaxed her guard a bit. Because this man was a teacher and now a preacher. The two words sounded similar to each other, making her a little amused. Unexpectedly, David's face suddenly became gloomy. Because a few days ago, his accomplices went out looking for food and were killed by a man leading a little girl. By the time Ellie realized it, it was too late. David's accomplices stood in front of the door holding guns pointed at her. Luckily, David had no intention of killing Ellie. He told the accomplice to bring the penicillin back. Ellie also didn't dare mention the venison. She picked up the penicillin and quickly ran away. Seeing that Joe's wound was beginning to fester, Ellie started to feel confused about where to inject the penicillin. After thinking for a while, she gritted her teeth and injected the medicine right next to the wound. She had done everything she could. Now, all they could do was pray and wait. The town was located right next to the edge of the forest, everywhere exuding the cold desolation of the end of the world. The two men in the kitchen were having headaches because the amount of food left was extremely small. A man carried a tray of fresh meat inside. After the food was finished cooking, all the survivors gathered in the dining hall. Suddenly, the room door was pushed open. David brought back the newly acquired venison. Everyone suddenly realized, so what was the meat in their bowl? David's face was a bit unsightly. He immediately changed the subject. He announced that he had discovered the man and the girl who had killed their accomplices. Tomorrow they would gather people to find their friend's place. The dead man's daughter blamed David for not immediately avenging her father. Unexpectedly, David came and gave her a slap. Then, in a high-pitched tone, he told her that he was everyone's father now. Everyone should understand what respect was. Everyone present was silent, not daring to speak. After David announced the prayer was over, everyone began to eat the meat in the bowl. Occasionally, the sound of food and bowls colliding sounded like a chorus saying that today's dish was very delicious. The next day, Ellie looked at Joe's wound and saw that it was much better than yesterday. Ellie was determined to get another shot of medicine for him. Opening the door, warm sunlight entered the room, but Ellie was in no mood to enjoy the sunlight and hurriedly went to get some snow. She also had to take care of the horse. Suddenly, the birds in the distance were startled by something. Ellie immediately felt that something bad had happened. She ran towards where the birds had flown to see what was going on, but it turned out that some people were coming nearby. Looking closely, David was bringing people. It turned out that the other party was not kind enough to forgive Ellie. They just wanted to follow Ellie's trail to find Joe, who was injured. But David still told his subordinates that it was best to capture Ellie alive. But now Ellie was extremely scared. No matter what she called, Joe was still in a coma and refused to wake up. Ellie could only leave her dagger with him and told him that if anyone came, he should kill them. And she quickly ran out of the basement and pulled the cabinet in front of the door. Then she mounted her horse and ran towards David's men. She wanted to lead the uninvited
Guests somewhere else, giving Joe the best chance to be missed. But these people were not fooled. They opened fire and hit the horse, which fell to the ground, causing Ellie to faint on the spot. So they went up to shoot a few more times, but were stopped by David. He had to take this girl back to town. In addition, 2 people had to stay behind to pull the horse back, and 3 others were responsible for killing Joe. Among them was an extremely unlucky guy. He searched the first room and found Joe's room. He also discovered that this room had signs of someone having placed a cabinet in front of the door. Although he tried not to make any noise, it still woke Joe up. When he went down the stairs to the bed with bloodstains, Joe suddenly appeared, grabbing him and choking him until he could no longer move. Only then did Joe loosen his grip. Not long after, the others who were looking to capture Joe also discovered that their comrade had disappeared. While looking for someone, he unexpectedly turned out to be Joe's next target. The remaining 2 people were also dealt with. Joe was a man of action. He didn't say much before a brutal interrogation. He quickly asked for the town's location. At this moment, Joe was extremely angry. Even when he was in a coma, they did not let a child go. Everyone in this town was going to die. At this time, Ellie gradually regained consciousness. She discovered she was locked in a cage. David stood outside, his face still very friendly. He believed that it would be difficult for Ellie to survive the apocalypse alone. She should just stay in town with him to start a new life. Ellie already knew that the other person was not a good person, so she remained silent and did not bother to answer. Until the other person left, she started looking for a way to escape. Who would have thought that a second later, the girl was so scared that her eyes widened? David came to give her food, and also noticed something different. Following her gaze, he quickly saw a human ear. Ellie suddenly thought of something, and looked again at the piece of meat on the plate. She angrily scolded David, looking like she wanted to cut him up. He shook his head. The meat on the plate, which she had just kicked over, was just venison. As for the other people in the town, because they wanted to fill their stomachs, they ate human flesh because they were pushed into a corner and had no other choice. As the leader of the town, he could not let the people here starve to death. And Joe, in order to protect Ellie, was not afraid to kill others. These 2 things were essentially the same. Ellie seemed to understand something. Her agitated mood had calmed down. David pressed her, as she softened, and continued. From the first time the 2 met, he realized that Ellie was a person with the qualities of a leader, strong, calm, and brave. But sooner or later he would grow old. The town needed someone like Ellie to continue protecting them. Ellie became even more quiet. She suddenly mentioned that Joe was injured, and asked if he could forgive Joe. After listening, he was extremely happy. This was also the responsibility that a leader must have. David immediately said that as long as she joined them, he would agree to all her conditions. It seemed like Ellie was convinced. She slowly reached out her hand, but unexpectedly, she immediately used all her strength to break David's finger. She wanted to take the opportunity to lock him in, but the other side pushed her down. David was no longer patient with being messed with by a brat. He left a sentence about preparing her to become dinner, then left the cell. By this time, Joe had arrived in town. Based on the bloodstains on the ground, he found a warehouse in a deserted place. There were a lot of useless items here. Of course, Ellie's bag was also here. It seemed like the people here had captured a lot of people alive. Investigating more closely, Joe saw the dead horse hanging from the roof of the house behind him. Joe felt his body break into a cold sweat. At this moment, Ellie was forcibly pulled from her cell. She seemed to have guessed her fate, so she found an opportunity to bite David. But that still couldn't stop her from being forced onto a large table. Ellie just yelled that she was sick. David, who was bitten, became furious. She then revealed the wound on her hand. The 2 men were seriously shocked. Ellie took the opportunity to grab a knife and cut one of them down, then quickly ran out of the room. Unfortunately, the door was locked tightly. She could only conveniently pick up a burning piece of wood. Waiting for David to come closer, she used all her strength to throw the wooden stick at him, unexpectedly causing a fire on the door next to her. David was in no mood to pay attention to the burning fire. He looked everywhere for Ellie. He really wanted to know about the wound on her hand. Could it be that if she had antibodies, she wouldn't get sick?
Ellie didn't intend to sit still and wait to die either. She picked up the dagger and suddenly appeared behind David. Although he was knocked down, he did not intend to give up. She picked up the dagger next to him and stabbed David hard. When she pushed open the restaurant door, she coincidentally met Joe, who had just arrived. Only then the girl calmed down. The madness and loneliness instantly disappeared. It seemed she had found her solid support again. End of Sigh.
Episode 8. We come to the final episode of the movie. After Ellie and Joe overcome the dangers in town, they continue on their way to find the Fireflies' base. Seeing them getting closer and closer to the base, little Ellie also gradually became gloomy. She was no longer as naughty as before, and Joe seemed to realize this too. He changed his image. The previously cold and cool uncle started telling the girl interesting stories, because he knew that the day they met the Fireflies organization was also the time when the two people had to separate. But both of them were silent, and no one mentioned this. They just silently searched for the Fireflies organization's base. Soon, the two entered an abandoned building. They decided to go to the roof to see the surrounding scenery. Joe tried his best to help Ellie go upstairs, but as soon as he let down the ladder, she ran away. Joe was a little worried and hurried up the stairs. It seemed that Ellie had just discovered a new toy. She ignored everything and ran forward until Joe breathlessly caught up. Then she saw a giraffe poking its head through the leaves. Ellie stood still like a curious child. Joe came to pick some leaves and gave them to her, causing the sadness on her face to immediately disappear. Until the giraffe had had its fill and left, Ellie just climbed upstairs. Unexpectedly, she saw several more giraffes standing on the grass. This place seemed completely separate from the outside world. Seeing Ellie's carefree appearance, Joe felt a little moved. He suddenly spoke. How about they stopped looking for the Fireflies? Actually, his life wasn't bad now. But Ellie seemed to have become a lot more mature. She believed that everything had a beginning and an end. Along the way, they had been through so many things that they couldn't just give up. After that, the two continued in silence and walked towards the hospital. After passing through a tunnel, a row of specialized doctor tents appeared before their faces. Joe realized that this was a veterans hospital established by the military before the end of the world. Joe pointed to the scar on his head. At that time, after his daughter died, the next day he was also taken to a hospital after the war. At that time, he did not have any motivation to continue living. Many years had passed, and now Joe could casually mention his daughter. Ellie exclaimed that indeed, time could heal all wounds. Unexpectedly, Joe turned his head and said to her that what healed his wounds was not time. Ellie nodded repeatedly, knowing that the healer in his words was herself. Then she automatically opened the book. The two happily asked each other questions about the world. While the two were laughing, they were startled when they saw a grenade flew in. Very quickly, they lost consciousness in that explosion. After Joe regained consciousness, he saw the leader of the Fireflies, Malin, in front of him. In addition, the person who attacked them earlier was from the Fireflies organization. At this time, Malin was very happy. When she came here from the doctor's place, half of the cars escorting her were seriously damaged, yet Joe alone was able to bring Ellie here safely. Right now, Joe only cared about Ellie's safety. Malin said she was preparing for surgery. The group of doctors said the cordyceps fungus in Ellie's body had grown with her since birth. It produced a type of communication compound, causing normal cordyceps to believe that Ellie was already infected. This was also the reason why she was immune. Then she slowly recounted the story of 10 years ago. A young pregnant woman was running like crazy in the woods as if something scary was chasing her from behind. The girl ran away to an abandoned house. Now she couldn't bear it any longer and found a private place to hide. She started screaming in pain. Suddenly, there was a strong sound of the door breaking outside. She took out a dagger, and at this moment an infected person rushed in. She couldn't move, so she just fought and waited for it, then used the dagger to stab it hard. Just as she let her guard down, the sound of children crying rang out. The baby was born. But her eyes were not filled with pain because her leg had been bitten by an infected person. From there, her close friend Malin followed the trail to find this building. But Ellie's mother was ready to transform. She only held Ellie and asked Malin to raise her, and lied that she was bitten after giving birth. Malin could not refuse her close friend's request and agreed to keep Ellie safe. After she went out holding the baby, she turned around and opened fire, killing her friend. Ellie was infected with cordyceps in her mother's womb, so from then on, she had special immunity. Joe still didn't understand what they planned to do now. Malin told him the Fireflies prepared to get the cordyceps variant from Ellie, then duplicate it in the laboratory. Perhaps soon they would find a cure for cordyceps. After hearing this, Joe felt heavy. He knew cordyceps was in the brain, and said that wasn't how they should operate on Ellie. Malin's face was very unsightly. For humanity's hope, they could only sacrifice Ellie. In her heart, she felt extremely guilty, because she had previously agreed with Ellie's mother to protect her. Joe was so angry that he cursed, but he was quickly pushed down by the guards. Malin did not intend to harm Joe, so she sent someone to take him a long way away. But Joe could not stand by and watch Ellie be killed. While being taken away by 2 soldiers, he very quickly learned the location of the operating room. When the other party was not paying attention, he immediately counterattacked. He elbowed one guy down, then grabbed the gun and quickly dealt with both of them. Joe put on his backpack, took a deep breath, then went upstairs. He had to deal with all the guards here to save the little girl Ellie, not knowing if she was still alive or dead.
Even though the enemy had surrendered and no longer resisted, Joe was determined not to leave anyone alive. After running out of bullets, he took the enemy's gun again. With his top-notch shooting ability, he very quickly killed everyone on the ground. The operating room was in front of Joe, and he suddenly felt tense. He didn't know whether Ellie's surgery had been completed or not. After taking a deep breath, he opened the operating room door. Thank goodness Ellie's surgery hadn't started yet. Joe didn't say much and immediately opened fire and shot the chief surgeon dead. Then he carried Ellie, who was in a coma, out of the room. When he was about to drive away from here, Malin was waiting, holding a gun. She felt Joe's approach was too selfish. After his death, how long could Ellie live? He was throwing away this chance to bring hope to all humanity. Joe was angry that this was not her decision to make. Malin objected, saying he should have asked Ellie's opinion. Joe suddenly fell silent, but when Malin slowly approached, he pulled the trigger. He finally made his decision. Between the world and Ellie, he selfishly chose Ellie. The scene changes. Ellie wakes up in the back seat of the car. Joe quickly says that the Firefly organization's research failed. They couldn't find a way to make a vaccine, and then they were attacked by bandits. With great difficulty, he was able to save Ellie. Now that it's all over, Joe plans to take her back to his brother's town. When the car ran out of gas, they were not far from their destination. They just needed to cross this mountain to reach it. Perhaps to hide the shame of lying, Joe kept talking continuously. He even proactively mentioned his daughter, Sarah. Compared to Ellie, Sarah was more of a girly girl. The girl had a very rebellious streak. Then Ellie kept moving her lips, and Joe hastily added that Sarah would definitely like her because she was very interesting. But it seemed that Ellie still had questions in her heart. She suddenly stopped and asked Joe. She remembered her lost friend Riley and also thought of Tess and Sam. All of these deaths were caused by the fungus. Now she just wanted to confirm one thing, whether all the stories Joe told about the Fireflies hospital were true or not. Joe looked straight at her and gave an affirmative answer. I swear it's true. The entire content of the movie The Last of Us Season 1 comes to an end. Congratulations on finishing watching a good movie. Here is a question. On a scale of 10, how would you rate this series? Please send your answer below in the comments section. Thanks for watching and see you in the next videos.